Hey guys, welcome back to Keys to the Cosmos. As you can see, it's time for another equipment review. I hope you were able to check out my last video on my newest telescope, my Takahashi FSQ-85. Really excited about that scope. But why I mention is because I mentioned in that video that that scope was replacing the smaller brother of this one. This is the Explore Scientific ED127. The scope that Takahashi replaced was my ED102. I've actually made a review video on that. If you haven't checked it out, check it out because I talk a lot about these line of scopes, refractors in general, how they compare to SCTs and other types of scopes, and why I prefer them. They're sort of my favorite type of telescope. And I'm not going to get into crazy detail about these Explore Scientific refractors. I will talk specifically about this model, of course, but it would be helpful to watch that video as well to give you a sort of a broader idea of, these scopes and why I love them so much. But yeah, that ED102 is gone. As I mentioned, it's gone to a good home. And this is my only Explore Scientific left. But I'm going to talk about, obviously, the details about this one, but why I love it so much for my particular use. And that should help you make a decision. If you're looking for a bigger, refractor telescope, maybe this would be the one for you as well. So just briefly, some things to go over, all the basic numbers that we always talk about. The aperture, 5-inch, it's 127 millimeters. That's the diameter. It is focal length, without any reducer in it, is 952 millimeters. So pretty good size. Anytime you start getting near 1,000 millimeters, you're getting into what's considered medium to large size refractor scope. I wouldn't call this a large one, but it's sort of medium to large is what I would call it. With the reducer in, which I currently have, it steps it down to 666 millimeters. So that's with the Explore Scientific 0.73 time reducer. You can see this is a big scope. This time I did a little differently with my ED102. I showed it sort of how you get it out of the box, compact. But this time I wanted to show it, as you would be using it for imaging. So I got the camera's attached, in this case I'm not really using extension, but the reducer's on here, that adds to the length. The only thing I haven't been able to, because I just wouldn't be able to get it in view, I don't have the dew shield out. But you can imagine, push this out another 6 inches, 6 or 8 inches, this scope gets pretty big. So you can imagine then like something like a 152 millimeter telescope, just how big and heavy that really is. So for me, I think this is as big as a refractor as I'll ever go. Don't quote me on that, you never know. But having seen this now and using it, I've been using it really for months now. It's been my go-to scope with this particular camera. This is as big as I am comfortable using at the moment. So I think it's big, but not too big. It's usable, and we'll talk a little bit more about the carbon fiber and why that's important. Or is it, is it something that you want to pay the extra for? So that's kind of sort of what we'll focus on when it comes to this specific telescope. So again, 5-inch aperture, 952 millimeters focal length, 666 with the Explore Scientific 0.73 time reducer. Now this has, as you can see here, it's the ED127 and it's FCD 100. So what does that mean? That's referring to the glass. It's Hoya FCD 100 glass. Now I don't geek out on, different types of glass and how they compare. It's so hard to say. I mean, there's whole forum discussions on that. All you need to know is it's very good glass. The ED102 has, I think, O'Hara FCD. I can't remember even what it is. You have to watch that video, but these are both very comparable. They're very high contrast, very crisp imaging and visual as well. So either way, this is going to provide the views and the sort of, exposures that you're going to really appreciate, especially when it comes to astrophotography. A quality scope like this, a quality apochromatic, we've talked about that in many videos, what that means. This is a triplet refractor. These are, I'm not going to say top of the line, obviously it's not a Takahashi, but these are very solid scopes, and I think you get good value for your money. So on top of that, let's talk about the speed. So this is, without the reducer, it's f7.5. So that's not bad. Definitely on the slow side without a reducer. but it's decent light gathering capability, and it's definitely usable for both visual and imaging. However, when you put the 0.73 time reducer in, that knocks that down to, I believe, 5.25. So now you're in that range where you want to be, not lightning quick by any means, but also not slow. It means that you don't need to do super long exposures to gather the amount of light that you need. And when that's always nice, you know, when you're putting a heavy scope on like this, if you don't have a really big mount that has great tracking, you may not be able to do 5-minute exposures. And in my case, where I'm doing all of my imaging unguided, I'm still able to do 3-minute exposures with this scope, and it's more than enough to be able to resolve really nice details. So f5.25 is very usable, and I would say you're sort of right in the middle where you want to be, not too slow, and it's not super fast either, but more than acceptable, let's put it that way. What else can we talk about? 2.5-inch focuser. It's the exact same focuser that's in the ED102, and the nice thing about that is, at the time when I had both, the reducer fit on both of these scopes. So that was sort of nice. That was sort of the reason when I was looking for a bigger scope, I ended up going with this one, because I knew I wouldn't have to buy a second reducer, which they aren't cheap and they're only going up in price. So I was able to keep that reducer and use it on this scope as well. So that's always a benefit. So the focal length, as we mentioned, 952 goes down to 666. On the ED102, we had 714 millimeters, and with the reducer, that went down to about 500 millimeters. So definitely, a noticeable difference. It's not night and day where they're two totally different scopes that are going to image two, totally different type of things in the sky. But, 500 to 666 millimeters, that's 166 millimeters. That's a noticeable amount. This is definitely the kind of scope where you're going to be able to go after smaller things in the night sky and not have to spend as much integration time and do crazy large crops. But we'll talk a little bit more about that and, help you determine if this is the kind of scope you want. Do you have other scopes? Could this be an only scope in your collection? Let's talk all about that. So first of all, I just want to say this does provide beautiful, as I mentioned, because of the glass and the quality of Explore Scientific, this provides beautiful imaging exposures. I'm very happy with the way it's been performing, and it's a very usable focal length. I haven't used it for visual, but I did use my ED102 as I mentioned in that video, and I was blown away by just how high contrast and sharp for visual it was, especially compared to like my SCT. Basically, I would call it night and day. You put a good filter in this, and this telescope comes with the same 2-inch star diagonal, okay, carbon fiber, so it's beautiful. It matches with this. You put a good filter in that star diagonal, and you're going to get some beautiful views. So no doubt, even though I haven't used it, I know that this would be a really nice telescope for visual. And usually when you do visual, you're probably not going to use a focal reducer. You're probably going to be looking at planets with something this size. So 952 millimeters is definitely enough to look at, all of the planets, no problem. I mean, maybe not some of the smaller, far away ones. Obviously, those are difficult even with a big telescope, but Mars and Saturn and Jupiter, you're going to get some beautiful views with this, probably even Venus if you're able to see it. And, this is going to be more than enough for things like that. Now, you're not going to get, Saturn's not going to be this big in your eyepiece, of course. For that, you would need like an 8-inch or bigger SET. But if you're the kind of person that kind of likes to do both visual and astrophotography, this would definitely be a great candidate for you because it really does both very well. Let's talk a little bit about the scope itself and how I have it configured. Now, you can see that I have, one of the things I talked about in the ED102, if I had to be really picky and sort of focus on a weak point, it's probably the focuser. The same is true with this. Obviously, it's the same focuser, but it's still a great focuser. I'm being picky here. I'm like, if you had to pick something for the price point and all that, probably the focuser could be a little bit better. Now, you can see that I have the ZWO electronic focuser attached. This is the first time and only scope I've ever done that with, and I must say I love it. I am going to do a video on that one day. Some of the challenges for attaching it, if you know what you're doing, now that I figured it out, it's not that difficult. It can be like a 15-20 minute job, but With this scope, it was a bit of a pain, but I learned anyway. And I got it on, and I've been using it with that, and I must say I do love it. No more bad enough mask or anything like that, and you're able to refocus without having to, much of a fuss at all. So I'll make a video on that, but you can see that's what that is. I have my ASI Air just showing you how I do it. It's on top. I'm actually using what would normally be for your guide scope, but for all you who always still bug me about it, no guide scope on here. I use it for my ASI Air. It comes with the rings that you see here. These are the Velcro things I talked about in another bands that I talked about in another video. It's just to sort of keep the wires in place. Even behind here, I have my dew heater. Okay, I was being super lazy. I didn't take anything off it, but I said I would show it to you as I use it for imaging. Now the reducers down here, I also have a filter tray here, another extender, and then I have, of course, my camera, and this is the ZW-0533 MC Pro. So this is how I've been using the scope. I've never used it with any other camera. This is sort of my bread and butter right now. So let's talk about sort of the type of things that you can image with this telescope. Now, obviously the camera makes a big difference because we've talked about this before. The size of the sensor can make quite a difference as when it comes to your field of view. So with this one here, the 533, that's a micro four thirds sensor. It's one of the smaller ones, smaller than APS-C, which is typical for most DSLRs, and the ASI 294, which is my other camera. That's more rectangular and a little bit bigger. This is a micro four thirds small square sensor. But the whole idea with this telescope was to go after some galaxies, some smaller planetary nebula, and some of the smaller nebula in general, not just the nebula, but going inside of a nebula and imaging some specific parts of it. That's what I had in mind, and that's what I've been using this for. And so far, I have to say, it's been working really well. You've probably seen, you've seen some of my videos, the Crab Nebula. I used this exact setup, and I was really happy with that. Yeah, I could have used another 50 to 100 millimeters of focal length, but we could almost always say that. It was no problem. I had to do some cropping, but it still did the trick when it came to the Crab Nebula, and I was really happy with the result. This is the kind of scope where you would use it for like the dumbbell. This would be great. I'm definitely going to be using this scope for that in the next couple of months. Recently I did elephant's trunk. Now I did a video on the whole region there in Cepheus, but with this scope, as I mentioned before, I actually went for the trunk itself. So IC 1396A. That A refers to the sort of stalk of gas that resembles that of an elephant's trunk. That's what I use this setup for. And as you'll see in that video that's coming soon, it was able to, with the field of view, zoom in right on that piece of gas that I wanted, and I didn't have to do a large crop, and I was very happy with the results. So that's where a telescope like this really works well. Could it be a one scope collection type item? That's maybe. That's how I'll put it. I still think that if you're somewhat new to astrophotography and you want to be able to shoot some of the bigger things in the sky, this isn't, even though you can make it work, which we'll reference in a second, this probably isn't. The more focal length you have, the more picky you have to be, the better tracking you have to be, the bigger mount you have to have, right? I used to sell my CEM 40EC, which still leaves more than enough weight, which I forgot to mention now that I reminded myself. This is 14 pounds, so not bad at all. That has to do a lot with the carbon fiber. We'll talk about that as well shortly. But yeah, this is probably not your first time scope for astrophotography, but can you use it for everything? Almost. I have to say, if you use astronomy, I think it's astronomy.tools. I've mentioned this website before. It's always sort of my go-to for referencing what my field of view will be when I'm thinking about a particular object and the telescope that I want to use. It shows you exactly how it'll appear in the field of view. It also helps you with matching the right camera to the right telescope and all that. And I have to say, this telescope works with almost all of the ZWO cameras. So the 533, the 294, the bigger boys, the 2600, the 6200, they all work really well with this telescope, and that's great to know. So you have a lot of options. But what I wanted to get to was, this could be a one-time scope if you have multiple cameras. So if, say, you had, say, a 533 like this one, okay, micro four thirds sensor, and then in addition to that, you had, say, the big 6200, obviously an expensive camera, but it has the option to shoot full frame. With this telescope, with that camera is set to full frame mode, you can actually image Andromeda comfortably. It fits perfectly in the field of view. Whereas the way it sits right now, even with the reducer, you're going to be shooting the core of Andromeda only. So yes, technically this could be a one scope type collection piece, and you could shoot most things in the night sky. Obviously you're not going to be shooting like really big things in the night sky, but Andromeda is pretty big, and I think I used my Sharp Star 76mm the last time I did this particular picture. So to be able to shoot with something like this, you know, actually I may have used my Red Cat. Now I'll tell you what I used right here, but if you haven't watched that video. But my point is that with a variety of cameras, you could use this for just about everything. Now when it comes to really small things, I mean, you're not going to get a smaller sensor than Micro Four Thirds, so you are limited in that sense. You're not going to be able to shoot tiny galaxies, at least not comfortably. Even small planetary nebula like the Ring Nebula, I think it's M57. This is just too small. You're going to struggle. Even just recently, I shot M82, the Cigar Galaxy. I'll have a video on that soon. You know, it was, if I'm being honest, it was, you know, wasn't enough focal length to really do it justice. When you want to resolve really small, fine details, you do need a bigger scope. Now you're talking about more like an SCT that's going to do targets like that justice. But if you want to shoot the Whirlpool Nebula, I'm going to have a video on that coming soon. I was super happy with the way that turned out. I think it's my best image to date. This was a perfect setup. Yeah, I still had to do some cropping. You'll see in that video, or if you haven't checked me out on Instagram already, at Keys of the Cosmos, I did a really super tight crop on that, and I was really happy with the details I was able to resolve. So for most of those type, you know, pinwheel, you can shoot M82 and M81. It's a little bit tight, but with the 294, you could shoot those together. You know, all of the sort of, I would say, medium size galaxies, you're able to go after with this. If you're looking for all the little tiny ones, you're going to need an SCT. And so that's something to keep in mind. But again, for this scope is sort of right in that middle ground. Even though it looks big, this is still considered a medium sized scope. So there's a lot of, depending on how many cameras you have and are willing to buy, there's a lot of options with this scope. It's really not, it's more options than I thought it would be, you know, especially when you're using a reducer. And again, you have the option to remove the reducer and bring it all the way back up to 952mm. And if you're doing something small, you can just crop around the corners anyway. So that's another way to look at it. I'm very lazy. I never take the reducer off. But if I really wanted to, plus I have an 8-inch SCT that one day I'll end up start using. But you know, you have that option as well. When you have the reducer, you can install it, you can remove it. But all it takes is a little bit of forethought, what you want to shoot. And a scope like this will give you a lot of options. But let's get to sort of the main question in my video. Is the carbon fiber worth it? You pay about 20% more for the carbon fiber because they do make a fiberglass version, aluminum. I am assuming it's aluminum version. It's just plain white, just like the ED102. You have both versions. Is it worth it? Well, yes and no. So I was always under the impression, and I think I mentioned in one of my other videos, that the carbon fiber, the main thing about it, other than being light, I mentioned this is 14 pounds. The white aluminum version, I think, is 18 pounds or 17. So 3 or 4 pounds is not nothing. It's significant. So you get the lightness. It's also very hard, very stiff. Take it from me, on the ED102, it took a little tumble one time and it held up no problem. I could imagine that aluminum would be more prone to denting, whereas carbon fiber, as you know, if it's being used in just about everything, you know, cars and because it's not only lightweight, but it's super strong as well. So you definitely get those benefits. But let's talk strictly imaging and image quality. I was under the impression that with carbon fiber, it didn't react so much to change in temperature, and that is true. But what I have learned recently is that it doesn't really affect closed system telescopes. So we call this closed because there's glass on one end, you know, you have a camera on the other. It's a closed system. There's nothing inside that's really exposed to the elements. So as a result, it's not going to be as effective when it comes to swings, you know, in temperature, especially in the winter. When you think of a place here in Toronto, you know, it can drop 8-10 degrees in just a matter of a few hours, especially in the wintertime. So one thing I have noticed is that I do still have to adjust the focus. That was what I was sort of told when I bought it, that you wouldn't have to adjust focus as much because of the carbon fiber, because the glass, it stops the glass from moving as a result of the temperature change, and you don't need to adjust the focus. Now, maybe that is true. I've never owned the sort of lower version, the aluminum white version, but I will tell you right now, being perfectly honest, you do have to watch the focus. I generally will focus, I'll let this sit outside and cool or warm up depending on the season, at least half an hour to 45 minutes, and then after I'll do my final focus adjustment with the electronic focuser, and then after an hour I will check it and do a focus again, because I have seen it way out of focus even in an hour when there's those temperature swings. So something to keep in mind. What I've learned is that where carbon fiber does work the best is open system telescopes. So here's an example. You know, these telescopes are crazy expensive, but they're basically open exposed telescopes where the carbon fiber is sort of the frame of the telescope. And what I've understood, in that case, the carbon fiber does make a huge difference. It's not just for weight. It helps stop it expand and you know, contract in the cold and warm weather, and it keeps it more stable for focus. With a closed system like this, yeah, maybe it does have a little bit of an effect, but not as big a deal. Let's be honest, it's more for looks. It's beautiful. It's so well done, this carbon fiber. Weight, it brings it down a little bit, and you know, it is definitely more rigid and a much stronger material. So is it worth it? That's up to you. If it's already a struggle, you know, you may want to go with the simple white one, save some money. As I said, it's about 20% give or take, and you know, you're still going to have the same glass, the same focuser, all that's the same. So, you know, it's a decision you have to make, but obviously I do love the way these look, and they are gorgeous. So I'm happy with my decision, but I just want to be honest with you guys. If it's already maybe a little bit out of your price range, maybe consider the lower one. I did notice that on, maybe I was wrong, but on Explore Scientific's website, I did not notice this model anymore. They only had the white aluminum one. Same with the ED127. So these may be discontinued. I got to look more into that, but there are still some, at least Canadian distributors that have them in stock, one or two. So if it is one you've been thinking about, you might want to reach out and ask your distributor about that, if they're being discontinued. And if this is the model you really want, you may want to pull the trigger on it sooner than later. But other than that, I have to say, it's been a great telescope. At the end of this video, I'm going to show sort of some of the single exposures that I've done with it, and just to sort of give you a rough idea on some objects and the field of view that you get with it. And some of them will even be images that I haven't even released yet, or at least haven't made a video on. So check that out at the end of this video. But I have to say, I love this telescope. This is going to be one I'm going to have for quite some time. It's not going anywhere. It's just the perfect balance in so many ways, and knowing that I can have the option of putting a full frame camera on it and still shooting something like Andromeda, that's amazing. That's good to know. So there is a lot of versatility. Yes, you know, it's more money, buying more cameras and all that. So something to keep in mind. But I hope this video helped you in sort of making a decision if this is the sort of model that you were thinking about. I definitely have nothing that I can honestly complain about. It's been a great scope, and I've been using this for the last, I would say, 4-5 months solid. Just about every night I've been out with this thing. And with this 533, I just love this combination. It's just a beautiful, they work so well together. I can't complain. So yeah, check out some of these exposures I'll have coming up at the end of the video to help you give you an idea. But this really is a versatile scope, beautiful quality. And it does visual really well if that's something that you're into. So I can't recommend it enough. I hope this helps, guys. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your support, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.